In this video, I'll show you how to prep your dog's coat before clipping. Coat prep is essential. If the coat isn't brushed, washed and dried properly, your clippers can get caught in knots and mats which can pull on your dog's skin and cause them discomfort. Dirty coats can also blunt your clippers and your scissors, and if the coat isn't fluff dried straight, it can result in an uneven cut. The prep process has 4 steps: brush, pre-clip, wash and dry. Let's get started. The first step is to brush your dog's coat to remove any mats or knots. If mats aren't removed before bathing, they actually tighten when wet, which makes them harder and more uncomfortable to remove later. I like to start brushing using a slicker brush. A slicker brush has fine wire bristles that work through the coat to break up the knots and tangles. Many people only brush the top layer of fur, especially on long-coated dogs, but mats usually form close to the skin, so that's why we use a technique called line brushing. To line brush with one hand, you gently push the coat back so you can see the skin, and then with the other hand, brush from the roots outwards. Slowly move your hand along the body in a line, brushing in small sections at a time. To keep your dog still, I recommend you ask someone to hold them for you, or if you're alone, you can use a slip lead and attach it to the top of your grooming table with a slip knot. Continue to line brush the rest of your dog's coat. If your dog tries to sit when you brush their tail, you can use either a grooming sling or brush it while they're sitting. To brush the tail, hold the tailbone and brush the fur away from it. Holding the bone will prevent the fur from pulling, which can irritate your dog. Once you've finished brushing with the slicker brush, go over it with a comb to double check for any knots. If the comb gets stuck, then give it another brush with the slicker brush. Once you finish brushing a section, go over it with the comb. If the comb gets stuck, give it another brush. And if you come across any mats you can't brush out, you can either use scissors to remove them, or you can use a dematting tool, or if it's really close to the skin, you can shave it out. I'll link to a video above that I created on how to remove mats. Once you've finished the body, move on to the head and face. First, brush the top of the head with the slicker brush, and then once that's done, move on down to the ears. First, brush the outside of the ears, and then the inside of the ears. When brushing the inside of the ear, be very careful not to brush the ear leather, because the wire bristles on the slicker brush can easily scratch the leather. Now once you're done brushing, then run through the comb. If the comb gets stuck, it means there's more sort of knots and tangles stuck in there. That means you just need to give it another brush with the slicker brush. Once you've brushed through thoroughly, double check again with the comb. If the comb combs through freely, then you can move on to the next section. I'll now give the chin a bit of a brush, and also down the neck. And I'll pay particular attention to where the collar would sit, because the collar can rub on the fur, causing mats. I'll also give her muzzle a bit of a brush, and then I'll repeat the same process on the other side of her face. Now that your dog is brushed and tangle-free, it's time for a rough pre-clip. The purpose of this step is to remove excess coat before bathing. This saves time when washing and drying because you're not cleaning and drying fur that you'll just trim off later. Today I'm using my Heineken clippers with a 4-comb on soda. Now this pre-clip doesn't have to be perfect, just aim to remove the bulk of the fur. I'll talk through what I'm doing now, however I'll link above to a full step-by-step clipping tutorial. First I like to clip the dog's back, so I brush up the fur with my slicker brush, and then I glide the clippers down so it is back. Next I'll clip her sides, and then to get under her belly, it's easy if you just lift up one of the legs. To finish the rest of her back, I brush up the fur and then glide the clippers down her back and her hind legs. To prevent her from sitting, I've just got my hand underneath resting on her belly. I lift up her leg to trim her hock, and then I run the clippers down her other side and the rest of her back leg. Next up is her neck, so I'll flip her ear over so it doesn't get in the way, and then I'll run the clippers down her neck, under her chin, down her chest, and then into her front legs here. I'll continue around and do the other side. I'll flip over her ear and then run the clippers down her neck and then down into her back section there. Next is her face, so I'll use the slicker brush to brush the fur down over her eyes, and then I'll get my clippers, position them just above her eyes and clip over her head towards her neck. And I'll do that a couple of times. Then I'll flip her ear back and I'll run the clippers down the side of her face. So just one clipper width between her eye and her ear. I'll do that on the other side. And then I'll lift her head, run the clippers down her chest again, brush up for any fur that I've missed, and I'll run them down a second time. Next I'll trim the fur on her front legs, so I'll brush up the fur with my slicker brush, and then I'll grab my clippers, and I'll run the clippers down the front of the leg, the sides of the legs, and the back of the leg. And then if I see any fur still on her chest or just behind her legs, I'll quickly run the clippers down that as well. So run the clippers down the front of the leg, the side of the leg, and then behind the leg. Typically groomers would trim the nails and do the hygiene clip before the bath. However, I prefer to trim the nails at the very end once I've shaped the paws so I have better visibility. I also prefer to do the hygiene clip, which is shaving the belly and private areas after the bath and blow dry. However, if you'd like to do it now, I'll link to my hygiene tutorial above so you can check it out. Next is bath time. I wash my dogs in a bathtub using a push-on shower head and a non-slip mat. Now first I'm going to test the water just to make sure it's lukewarm and it's not too hot for her. You just test it on your back of your wrist here. Now when rinsing your dog, start from the top of the dog and work your way down. Don't forget under their belly, their legs, get their chest. And don't forget their tail and bottom. Now when rinsing the head, you want to make sure you don't get water in the eyes, so just cover the eyes and flip the water back. You also don't want to get water in their ears, so don't lift their ears, just gently let the water flow down. You also don't want to get water down their nose because that will go into their lungs. So when you wash their face, just wash from the back and just down the sides like this. You can also pinch their ear at the top here when you rinse it so you don't get any water in. I like to water down my shampoo. When you get it in its packaging, it is quite concentrated. So I use this squeezy sauce bottle and I fill it up 3/4 with shampoo and then I add 1/4 of water. And that just makes it really easy to spread on the dog and lather up. Now when choosing a shampoo, just make sure you do get a dog shampoo, you don't get human shampoo. Dogs have a different pH level in their skin, so if you do use a human shampoo, it can irritate them and cause them to itch. Now when putting on the shampoo, I like to start at the top of the dog and work my way down. Dogs do like a little head massage, so massage around the face if you like. And you might find some sleep caught here in their eyes. It's quite hard. You might be able to just pick it off with your fingers. If not, later once they're dry, I'll show you how to cut that out with scissors. Make sure you really scrub their paws. Their paws get so much dirt and debris stuck in them. Don't forget to do under their arms, their belly, and their back legs. Wash their bottom. There might be some dry poo on there that you can just pick off. And don't forget their tail. Okay, now I'll just rinse her off. Checking that temperature on my wrist again. Starting at the top and working my way down. Now I have just given her a really rough rinse because I'm going to have a conditioner. So with the conditioner, I just squeeze a bit down the dog's back and rub it all in. Might just add a little bit more for her head. Okay, she's ready for another rinse. do just have to be mindful to keep my hands sort of around her so she doesn't jump out of the bath. It's really important you get all of the conditioner out. If you do leave some in there, it can irritate the dog and they can get quite itchy. So just make sure when you're rinsing you can't see any suds left. And feel with your hand, if it feels a bit slimy like there's still product in the coat, just keep rinsing. Bathing your dog is also a great opportunity to perform a bit of a health check. While your dog is all wet, you can use your hands, rub your hands all over your dog to see if you can feel any lumps or bumps that you didn't know were there. If you do find any, you might want to check those out with your vet. Next thing I do is I will squeeze her dry. I'll try and get as much water out of her coat before I get her out of the bath. So I'll squeeze her ears, squeeze the fur under her chin, and I'll squeeze her legs. Okay, I'll squeeze her tail, her back legs, and get out as much water as possible. Next, I'll towel dry her to try and get as much water off her as possible. Just having a shake. There we go. Hey, good girl, Soda. Good girl. Again, I'll squeeze her legs, rub her back, squeeze her back legs and tail. Once you've soaked up the bulk of the water with the towel, the final step is to dry your dog with a pet dryer so you get that nice fluffy look. This is my high velocity pet dryer I purchased from Amazon a couple of years ago. It has a couple of different heat settings. It has high heat, low heat, and no heat, which is what I use during summer. This here is a switch to turn the dryer on and off, and the dial next to it is used to increase the speed of air. You can dial this up or down depending on how comfortable your dog is with the airflow and the noise. It also comes with a couple of different nozzles. I prefer to use this flat nozzle. My first tip for drying an anxious dog like Soda is to pop a ball of cotton wool in their ears to muffle the sound of the dryer. Just break up the cotton wool into a size that's just big enough to fit in your dog's ear and just place it into the surface of the ear so it doesn't fall out. My second tip is to cover their ears with a happy hoodie. This fabric band applies gentle compression which calms dogs during stressful situations and protects them from loud noises. This fabric will also help dry your dog's head and ears, which is great because not many dogs like having their face dried. Not all dogs like wearing a happy hoodie, so you'll notice Soda will paw hers off at some stage during the groom, which is why I've also put cotton wool in her ears. I like to start drying the back of the dog first. The airflow isn't in their face, so they seem to tolerate it more. Start on a low speed, let the dog get comfortable with the noise, and then start drying from a distance. Once your dog is comfortable, you can slowly move closer to their body, and if they're still comfortable, you can increase the speed of the airflow. I like to be led by what the dog does and what they're comfortable with. Soda likes to be held in my arms while she gets used to the dryer, so I'm happy to hold her and be guided by her. I like to dry in an up and down motion. Drying in a circular motion can knot the coat if it's quite long. I would love to dry one section completely and then move on to the next. However, I dry whatever I can until the dog changes positions. I work around them. Keep the dryer moving and avoid staying in the one spot for too long, especially if you're using a heat setting so it doesn't overheat in one area, just like when you dry your own hair. You may be tempted to use your human hairdryer to dry your dog. However, dog skin is a lot thinner than human skin, which means our hairdryers can easily dry out their skin, or worse, burn them if they're on a heat setting. They're also not as powerful as high velocity pet dryers, and they work a little bit differently. High velocity pet dryers, like what I'm using today, uses force to remove water from their hair, whereas human hair dryers evaporate the water from the hair's surface, which is why you can easily dry out your dog's skin. Once the back is dry, or nearly dry, I like to dry the back legs and tail. See how I'm holding Soda? I have my hand holding her under her belly. I'm only holding her very gently so she can move away if she wants to. I'm not restraining her. My hand under her belly and her head under my arm makes her feel safe. And my hand under her belly also discourages her from sitting down, which dogs tend to do when you dry their back legs, tail, and bottom. Here's a close-up so you can see the force of the high velocity pet dryer. My dryer is on the lowest setting and you can still see the force of the air dries through the thick fur to Soda's skin. Another tip for home groomers, and particularly if you're grooming an anxious dog, is to place your grooming table against a wall. This means you'll have one less side of the table to worry about your dog jumping off if they get scared. Another advantage of using the high velocity pet dryer to dry your dog is the force of the air can loosen any knots and mats you come across. So if it loosens them, it means they'll be much easier to brush out later once the dog is fully dry with the slicker brush. Another tip for home groomers is to use a slip lead and tie it to the top of the grooming table using a slip knot to help keep your dog still. It's much safer than using the grooming noose that comes with your grooming table because if your dog accidentally falls off the table, the knot will quickly release without hurting them. I'll link to my video where I demonstrate how to tie a slip knot. This is a better angle to demonstrate how I blow dry the back legs, tail and bottom. See how I have my hand underneath her belly and between her legs to try and stop her from sitting? And I also move my hand to move her tail out of the way so I can dry her bottom and the inside of her legs. I do find it difficult to dry dogs' bottoms completely as most dogs I groom are sensitive to air on their bum. See how Soda tries to sit down when I lift her tail to dry her bottom? Don't worry about it, it will eventually dry, so don't be too fussy. To straighten the fur and get that fluffy look your dog has when they come home from the groomers, hold the dryer in one hand and a slicker brush in the other hand and brush the fur as you dry. Just like you would brush your hair as you dry it, this technique separates the fur, allowing more airflow to each strand, which allows it to dry quicker. Brush and dry from the skin to the ends of the fur. And once you've finished an area, feel it with your hand to double check the coat is completely dry from the skin and not just the tips of the fur. Otherwise the coat will go wavy within a couple of days. Now I'm just finishing off drying the back legs. Soda has climbed my arms again, but it's put her in a great position for me to be able to dry the front of her back legs, the insides of her legs, as well as her belly. Next up is the front legs. I'm going to lower the airflow of the dryer and remove the nozzle to reduce the noise because Soda doesn't like air on her front feet. Not all dogs can tolerate this method of drying, which is fine. It's all about grooming for home comfort. I have 2 dogs I groom, one of which is mine, Poppy, who you'll see in the background of this video, that won't let me use a high velocity dryer on them, which is fine. I let them air dry before I clip them. It just means the grooming process takes a little bit longer and their coat will dry with a wave in it and won't be straight, which is fine. With Poppy, I groom her over a few days. I'll wash her one day and let her dry that day and then clip her the next day once her coat is dry. You'll notice I'm giving Soda a scratch behind her ears and also under her neck as I dry her. This is to keep her calm, but also to distract her because I know she doesn't enjoy me drying her legs. This hasn't distracted her for long. As you can see, she's now moving around the table, but that's all right. Another way to keep her still so you can dry her legs is to lift the opposite leg to the one that you're drying. And it also gives you a really good angle so you can dry the inside of their leg. As I get closer and closer to drying Soda's face, she tolerates the dryer less. So to dry her chest, I start with her front legs and I slowly move closer towards her chest. And to distract her, as well as to straighten her fur, I use my slicker brush. As you can see, brushing her didn't distract her too much, so I've moved on to treats. Here I have a dental chew. It's one of Soda's favourite treats, and it also takes her a little while to eat it, which means in theory she should be distracted for longer. As I offer it to her to chew, I quickly try to dry her chest. As you can see, she's onto me, and my other dog Poppy has seen the treat and has popped her head up to get in on the action. As she eats it, I continue to dry her shoulders, which is still a little bit wet, as well as her chest. Now that she's finished her chew, she quickly lets me dry her neck underneath where the slip lead has been. She seems a lot calmer and is tolerating me finishing off drying the rest of her chest. I leave drying the head until last because not many dogs I know like having their head blow dried, and if I leave it until last, the fur will air dry a bit anyway. If your dog doesn't like you drying their head, just let them air dry, and once you've clipped their body, their head will be dry enough for you to groom. When drying the face, come from the side and direct the airflow down their muzzle and under their chin. Avoid pointing the air directly on the front of their face, as this can irritate their eyes and their nose. When drying the ears, I like to brush them at the same time to separate the hair and speed up the drying process. I also like using the slicker brush as a bit of a distraction. If Soda's paying attention to me brushing her, I think she's paying less attention to the dryer. The ear fur can get tangled really easily by the high velocity pet dryer, especially if your dog has really long ear fur, so dry it from above the ear, angling the air downwards. Soda won't let me do this, so I'm drying in an up and down motion. Luckily for her, I've layered the fur on her ears so it's not that long, which helps it not get tangled. Avoid drying in a circular motion, as this can create knots easily. It can be difficult drying the fur underneath your dog's chin and also the inside of their ears. Soda's cooperating at the moment, which is great. She's letting me point the air underneath her face and seems to be enjoying it. I try not to make any sudden movements, as this might scare her and she'll stop tolerating it. Okay, I'm satisfied this is as dry as I'm going to get Soda's face, so I'll just let her air dry for now, and I'll show you later how fluffy her coat looks when she's fully dry. Soda's back from having a big nap on the couch, and you can see her face is completely dry now. Look at how straight and fluffy her coat is. It's so soft to touch. And now she's ready for me to clip her fur, which I'll demonstrate how to do that in my next video. Thanks for watching.